We were talking about my work and why this particular show I'm going to do today is very important to me. When I talk about the Southwest, it's my homeland. Cuentos de Aslan. Cuentos is a Spanish word meaning story. Aslan is just where we're at. It's the southwestern part of the United States. It's considered the historical homeland of the Aztec native people from Mexico. And then this is one time I can say I'm the guy that wrote the book. I've written 6 books. That qualifies me as an expert in anyone's chapter, including my own. I've written 6 books all about the arts and culture of the Southwest, the Hispanic Southwest. 2 of them specifically, one of them is called The Corn Woman, Stories and Legends of the Hispanic Southwest. The other one is called The Eagle and the Cactus, Stories and Legends from Mexico. So what happens is this, in those 2 books are 90 stories. So I'm literally the guy that wrote the book. Here's how I got these stories that I'm going to tell you today and why they're important to me. I view them as stories from the homeland, from my own family. I got these stories from 3 places. One of them is I did the work of the scholar. I went to the library. Now, this was pre-computer, right? Nowadays, I don't go to the library. My everyone else Google up what I'm looking for. Boom, 1 second I have it. Back in the day, scholars had to go to the research library. And then you're looking for these rare books. The primary source books is what they're called. Just one book. So they're in a special room up there. You have to get permission to go into the room. It's a locked room. And then a library goes and get that dusty tome off the shelf. And then you're in the room, and you got to put the white gloves on. And the reason is these are rare, precious books, and they don't want human oils on the pages. And then the guard stands in the room with you like this. And I asked, why the guard in the room with me? And they said, because, unimaginable to me, but it does happen, people tear pages out of the books. So there's a guard in and then so old school had to go to find old books, read all the original primary source materials, a lot of them from the very early parts of the 1910s, 1920s by Juan Vigil. The second way I got them was more fun. I got grants for a couple of summers and I drove all over southern Colorado, northern New Mexico, visiting elderly people from my own community. Every single one of them's dead now. I'm the next one in line. So what happens is this. They're the repositories of cultural history, especially the oral traditions. Now remember, a lot of these stories came from pre-literate times, not written down in books. The only way that this history was transmitted was through oral stories like we're doing now. People telling stories to each other around the campfire, around the stove, late in the evening. So I traveled all over and had a pre-introduction to go to people's houses. And then I would meet these elderly people, and I recorded almost 120 hours of field tapes. So part of the work of the scholar, first one, library research, now internet research. But then the other part of it actually is called field research, where you go interview people, make your field tape recordings. The last way, and then here's what happened when I was doing that was most fun. I learned to show up late in the afternoon. You going where I'm going? Going where I'm going? Very hospitable, very kind, very nice people. I show up late in the afternoon. Pretty soon, La Vieja, the old lady, the grandma, she says, excuse me, time to prepare supper. Perfect timing. Perfect timing. So what happens is I was invited to supper a lot in these homes where little old grandma had made supper for the family, and I was an honored guest and got to eat home-cooked food like my mom would have made. So that was the second way I got stories. The third way I got stories was another way. I got to tell you this one. So I go visit my mom, and I'm a respectful boy. I don't like to make my mom cry, okay? So she's always curious about what I'm doing. Well, what are you doing? What are you doing? So I tell her a little bit, and so she throws the gauntlet down. Yeah, well, tell me one of those stories. So I tell her a story. Get in the car. So we get in the car and we go visit my Aunt Vanjie. So we go into my Aunt Vanjie's house. Now my Aunt Vanjie had the blue room. The blue room, no human being could go into it. All the sofa and everything covered in plastic. I got some heads nodding, The blue room, everything was blue in there, covered in plastic. No human being was allowed to go into the blue room. Definitely don't sit on any furniture. So we're in the kitchen, okay? And then she tells me, okay, tell us the story you just told me so Vanjie can hear it. So then I tell them the story again, and they now I've made my mom cry, made my aunt cry. And then they start talking to each other in Spanish. Now, their first language was Spanish. The only time I've ever heard them talk in Spanish is when they're together as a group, at a wedding or a funeral, or they don't want the kids to know what they're saying. So they're talking to each other in Spanish, and then when they pull themselves out of it, I don't rush them, figure this is their own moment. Then what happens is then they tell me, I said, well, what caused all this commotion, right? And then they said, now that you're an older man, your voice sounds, and your accent sounds like our Uncle Joe, Tio Joe. And he was the family raconteur / liar. He was the family storyteller. And what he would do, he said, now, we haven't heard that story since we were children. A story about how a man could understand the language of animals. And Tio Joe told them the story. And they said, if we close our eyes and don't look at you, and we just hear your voice, we're children back at the farm. Those are the stories I'm going to tell you today. Now, I'm going to come at it from a scholar's viewpoint, but I wanted you to know why I call this show Stories from the Homeland. These are stories very close to me. When they're a little bit older, these two kids here, already they know when it's bath time, I come in and tell them a story at bath time. So here's what happens. Scholars, there's categories of stories, okay? And every story has a number, and it's just the work of a folklorist or academic scholar. I'm not going to bore you with that aspect of it today, but I'm going to introduce the stories by category. So this is a lecture, kind of a scholarly lecture, about the traditional stories, cuentos, from the Hispanic Southwest, from the era of the oral traditions. These stories came from Spain, got on the boat, came all the way over to Veracruz, came all the way up the Camino Royal, all the way up to northern New Mexico, to a little farm outside of Springer, New Mexico, where Tio Joe told these stories to my mom's generation. They've been passed down to me. I consider myself a repository. I'm a library of all these stories, but the doors are open and they're free to check out. And you're free to pass these on if you want to. First category, stories. They're a lot of fun. They're short, little, tiny stories. If you listen to stories that a lot of people tell, they're after you hear a lot of them, you're going to understand more about them, their culture, who they are, why they pass these stories on, these generational wisdom from one generation to a younger generation. Kind of works like this. First group of stories are called chistes, short, small tales. Chistes all have a little twist at the end, meant to be comic. The first one is called You First. Once, there were two old people, a little old viejo and a little old viejita, a little man, a little old lady. And every morning, they were thankful to have another day on this earth, and that Doña Sebastiana, death, La Muerte herself, had not come for them at nighttime for the long journey into eternity. So they'd wake up every morning and have the same morning ritual. They'd wake up, check all the parts. He's laughing. Not good, you're laughing. Not good, you're laughing. I do the same thing. Spend a moment, systems working, I can walk. So every morning it's the same thing, right? But they played a game every morning. The old man would look at the old lady and say, today, if the good Lord sends an archangel for my soul, I'll go first. And then the old lady, she'd say, no, 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 no. The grandchildren still need you. I've lived a long life. Today, if the good Lord sends down an archangel for my soul, I'll go first. So every morning, same ritual. I'll go first, I'll go first. That morning, however, El Diablo himself, the devil, had come to earth and was roaming earth looking to do what his favorite pastime is, cause turmoil in the lives of people on earth. So he goes by the house and he hears this, you first, and then he decides to play a devil's trick on him, disguises himself as an archangel of the Lord. Goes up, knocks on the door. Ooh, they're not used to having visitors in the morning. The old man goes and opens the door, looks up. There, in all the splendor and glory, was an archangel of the Lord. He didn't know what to say. And the archangel of the Lord said, I've come today to collect your soul for the long journey into eternity. The old man clears his throat, looks at the old lady. She clears her throat. He says, you know, I've been thinking, maybe you're right. You first. Once, there was this family living on a farm. And this farm, well, they had a grandpa. And the grandpa, well, he was strong and did all the work and everything. But the grandpa, like happens to all of us, as the years progressed, the ailments of old age is settled on him, and he decided he's not going to do any more work on the farm. Someone else could take care of the horse. Someone else could take care of the fence. Someone else could take care of the field. He was done working. Now, I got to tell you, in a working farm, every person works. So to have one person decide they're not going to work anymore, or they're a man down, that's not a good thing. So the father called a family meeting, said, what are we going to do about Grandpa? He doesn't want to work anymore. And then something even worse happened. He got all grouchy in his old age. And one of the best things he did every night was when he put his grandchildren to bed, he'd cover them up in the blanket, and then he'd tell them stories from his own childhood. And every night, the grandchildren went to sleep comforted by the soothing voice of their own grandfather telling them stories as they fell into childhood slumber. Well, he just started, the kid started getting on his nerves. He said, you're nothing but trouble. No more stories tonight, go to bed. So that was the final straw. He stopped telling stories to the grandkids. So the father had the family. He's not working anymore, not telling stories. Well, he's worthless. You know what he can do? If he's so unhappy, he can live in the barn with the animals from here on out. Live in the barn with the animals, live in the barn with the animals. So here's what happens. He tells the son, get that wool blanket that I wove this fall and bring it over here. What for? We're going to give it to your grandpa so he has a warm blanket because he's going to be sleeping with the animals in the barn from here on out. So the kid brought the blanket, spread it out on the rug, got a pair of scissors out, started to cut it in half. And the father said, why are you cutting that blanket into two pieces? And he said, I'm cutting that blanket into two pieces, so now we have two blankets. One for Grandpa now, and one for when we move you into the barn. From that day on, Grandpa lived in the house. Once, there were two compadres, and compadres, well, that's one of the tightest bonds two old men can have. Two old compadres. And they were good friends. And every night they'd go to the cantina. And in the cantina, I got to tell you about the cantina. Cervezas para todos mis amigos. You start yelling beer for all my friends in Cantina, you got a lot of friends all of a sudden. Now, what they didn't know, however, is that day, 2 thieves had robbed a bank. And they have all these bags of gold with them, right? And they're running out of the village, but it's daytime, they don't know what to do about it. So they decide, we're going to hide in the cemetery. And by hiding in the cemetery, that way, late at night, under the cloak of darkness, we'll divide up the gold in the traditional ways of thieves. Uno para ti, uno para me. One for you, one for me. That was the plan. But running in, they tripped and they dropped 2 bags outside the wall to the cemetery. So they decided we'll go back later and we'll get those later. So the 2 compadres, they're coming back from the cantina like this. It's not good you recognize that walk. They're coming back from the cantina. I know it was you. I know it was you. So here's what happens. The compadres are walking by the cemetery, and it's dark, right? They hear voices in the cemetery. They're not used to hearing voices in the cemetery, so they listen real carefully, and they hear, uno para ti, uno para me. One for you, one for me. And they look at each other and they say, it's the Lord and the devil dividing up the souls. And then they hear, oh, wait a minute, let's go get those 2 we left outside. Whoa! Now, I will tell you, I love these chistes. There's a lot of them, but we're going to move on, okay? We're going to move on. Now, because I got my 2 grandkids right here, I'm going to tell the children's tale, okay? Ready, Arlo? Ready? Yeah, okay, he's ready, he's ready. Okay, here's what we got going. It's called the Dust Devil. Now, these children's tales, you can't tell the children's tale without a moral, right? Kind of like Aesop's fables. It's not just a story, it's, whoa, slow down. This hat doesn't even have a string on it, that's what I need. You have to remember, every story has to teach the younger generation a lesson. So this is called the Dust Devil. Once there was a little girl, and this little girl, she was sitting under a tree, and she was crying. And she wasn't crying like you broke your toy or you lost someone, you got scolded for messing up. She was crying because she was lonely and she didn't have a single friend in her life because they lived on a farm way out there isolated. So what happens is the father comes in and says, Mija, why are you crying? I don't have any friends. Well, you know we live, it's a long ways to and then all of a sudden here comes the cat. And the cat would wrap around its leg, and there's one of those cats that would go, would start purring right around its leg, just like that. And then a bird came and landed right on her shoulder. And every day she was a little girl that could feed the bird just like that. And over in the corral was the cow gently swaying back and forth. And every day she could jump on the cow's back and go for a ride. So the father said, you have good friends. You have the cat, you have the bird, and you have the cow. You should be happy with the friends you have. The little girl said, the cat, the bird, the cow. I want people friends. And the father said, well, you can sit here feeling sorry for yourself all you want, but I got work to do. And he just took off. So pretty soon here comes the cat. Cat wraps around her leg. Just like that. The cat said, little girl, why are you crying? I've never seen you cry so much. Little girl said, I'm crying because I'm lonely and I don't have any friends. Come chase me around like you every day and we have fun. Is anyone listening to me? I want people friends. And the cat went away sad and heartbroken because it thought it was a friend of the little girl. Just then, the bird came and landed right on the little girl's shoulder. And the bird said, little girl, why are you crying? I don't have any friends. And the bird took off, flew high in the sky, landed right by the little girl and said, "Come and fly with me in the sky like we do every day. I want people friends." And the bird flew away sad and heartbroken because it thought it was a friend of the little girl. Just then out of the corral, "Little girl, why are you crying?" "I don't have any friends." "Climb on my back. I'll give you a ride." "I want people friends." And the cow went away heartbroken because the cow had always thought it was the best friend of the little girl. Just then, off in the distance, a whirlwind of dust, even more windy than this wind. Whirlwind of dust came spinning and spinning and spinning. It was a crazy whirlwind of dust, one of those in the summer afternoon on the open plains would blow your hat off your head. And when that whirlwind of dust stopped right in front of the little girl, and all that dust settled from the top of the sky to the bottom of the sky, there stood a person. And that person said, "Little girl, I've come to be your friend." "Oh, a person friend for me. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you." "Yes, I've come to be your friend." "Oh, a person friend for me. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you." "Yes, in fact, why don't you come to my house?" Just then, up jumped the cat. Cat says, "Little girl, don't go. It's El Diablo, the devil himself. If El Diablo gets you, we'll never see you again." Ooh, that made El Diablo furious. Boom, he kicks that cat. Cat goes flying. Little girl said, "Why'd you kick my friend, the cat? That was my friend, the cat." And El Diablo said, "Oh, gee, I can't believe I made a big mistake. I thought it was a tumbleweed. I was just kicking that tumbleweed out of the way so it didn't get you. I love cats. There are lots of cats at my house. Why don't you come to my house?" Shoo! The bird landed. Bird said, "Little girl, whatever you do, do not go. It's El Diablo." Bird started to fly away. Ooh, that made El Diablo mad. He shot out the bolt of lightning. Boom, splat. Why'd you do that to my friend the bird? I love my friend the bird." "Oh, I can't believe I've made 2 mistakes in one day. I thought that was a snake falling from the sky. I was just knocking that snake out of the way so it didn't get you at all." All of a sudden, "Little girl, don't go. It's El Diablo." That made El Diablo furious. Boom! He kicked that cow. Cow goes flying. That's the real reason the cow jumped over the moon. Little girl says, "You're El Diablo." "Yes, and you're coming to my house." And he grabbed her like that. Up jumped the cat. Cat starts scratching El Diablo's face. He can't see anything. He spins around, tries to get her again. Bird flies over, starts pecking El Diablo on the face. Cat scratching El Diablo in the face. Bird pecking El Diablo on the head. And then he spins around again, and who's there but? "You're not about to get this little girl." Ooh, that made El Diablo furious. He started spinning and spinning and spinning. All the dust came up around him again from the bottom of the ground to the top of the sky. And then he disappeared over a distant hill. And that's why to this day, many people, especially in this part of the country, when they see one of those whirlwinds of dust, they call it a dust devil, because they know the devil is inside, mad about something. Later that day, the little girl's under a tree. Father comes by. "Well, what happened today?" "Well, Papa, a lot happened today." And then the cat came in. And then the bird came in. And then over in the corral, gently swaying back and forth, was the cow. And the little girl said, "Well, Papa, the friends I have might not be people friends, but they're the best friends a little girl could ever want. What do I got? Okay, 12:30. Okay, now I'm going to jump to another story. Well, kids got to learn lessons, but so do adults. So there's a whole category of lessons for adults, stories for adults. This is one of them. Los tres buenos consejos, the 3 pieces of good advice. Once, there are 2 compadres, good friends. And they were farmers, worked really hard on the farm, but what they had found out was, in years of drought, the ground doesn't give forth its abundance, and there's hunger throughout the valley. So they knew they had but one thing to do. They had to leave their farm, go over the mountain to the village, and find work in the village, and then send the money back to provide for their family. So they didn't want to do that, but they knew that's what they're going to have to do. So the 2 compadres are getting ready to go, and then one of the compadres saying goodbye to his family, and he's hugging his wife, and everyone's crying and holding him tight and everything. And then the other compadre is doing the same thing. And then the one man looked at his children and said, I don't know how long I'm going to be gone. When I get back, you might be growing up. I might not even recognize you. So he made a point to look at their face just like this and really try to remember what his own children look like in case he forgets them one day and they don't recognize him either. So they all say their goodbyes and then they're leaving. And while they're leaving, the 2 compadres, they're joking about, well, let's go over, let's find some good work. And then one says, hey, I know exactly the job I'm looking for. I'm looking for the job where you don't have to do any work. Indoors, air conditioning, with a secretary. And the other one said, yeah, you can dream about that all you want, but that's not how work is. Work is like this. You work hard, you make your money, you provide for your family. That's what real work is. So they're going back and forth about this and everything. Pretty soon they come around the bend, and a little old man comes around the bend. He's got a bag of gold. He's got 2 bags of gold. He's got 3 bags of gold. He's got 4, 5, 6. He's loaded down with bags of gold. And then the 2 compadres said, wow, look at that man. Maybe he knows a secret about getting money for your whole life. We better ask him what the secret is. So they go up to him. Buenos dias, senor. Perhaps you could share with us the secret about, where we notice all those bags of gold, about how we could have money for our whole life. And then the man looked at him real carefully, like looked him in the eye too. Took his time, make sure to look them right in the eye. And he says, well, it's kind of like this. I can see you're good men. I can see your heart is pure. Because of that, I'm going to give you the secret. It's going to work like this. Right now, you have a choice. I got all these bags of gold. I don't need them all. I will give you 1 bag of gold, free to keep. It's all yours. Or I'll give you 3 buenos consejos, 3 pieces of good advice. You decide. Well, I don't need to tell you. The lazy compadre, he grabbed the bag of gold. He said, it's true. Money for no work. My dream has come true. And the other compadre, he's walking back and forth like this, looking at the bag, looking at the old money. 1, 2, 3 things. And then the lazy one said, take the bag of gold. Are you crazy? It's free. It's right now. Yeah, but maybe those 3 pieces of good advice, Maybe they're good pieces of advice. Maybe they're the secret of how to have money your whole life. Oh, I don't know what to do. He said, okay, I've decided I'll take los tres buenos consejos, the 3 pieces of good advice. And the lazy compadre, he didn't even laugh. He was sad for his friend because he knew he'd given up a bag of gold for 3 worthless pieces of advice. So the man gave him the bag of gold, and then he called him over and he said, well, you've chosen very wisely. Let me tell you the 3 pieces of good advice. First piece of good advice, never take the shortcut. And the lazy compadre said, I hope the other one's about money. Second piece of advice, mind your own business. I hope the third one's about money. Last piece of advice, think before you act. Don't take the shortcut. Mind your own business. Think before you act. Or bag of gold. Well, that's what happened. So the little old man said, and you've chosen very wisely. And he took off with all his money. And then the lazy compadre, he had the bag of gold, and he just decided, well, I'm going back home. You still have to go over the mountain to find work with your 3 pieces of good advice. So they gave each other an abrazo, a good hug, and they split ways. And on their way back, the one said, hey, don't forget the first piece of advice. Don't take the shortcut. And then he said, you took the advice. I took the bag of gold. And he went, adios, amigo. So then the lazy compadre is on the way home, and then he realizes, wait a minute. There is a shortcut. I can be home before it gets dark. I'm going to take the shortcut. So he takes the shortcut, comes around the bend. There's some banditos setting up camp for the night, and they see him walking around with that bag of gold. Well, I don't need to tell you what happened. Teeth knocked out, bloody nose, black eye, hair pulled out, tied up, thrown in the bushes. They stole his gold and took off. And the lazy compadre was saying, you know that first piece of advice? That's a good piece of advice. Meanwhile, the hardworking compadre went into town, and he got a job at a restaurant, washing dishes. All day long washing dishes, but he'd make his little money, and then he'd send most of it back to take care of his family. And he's washing dishes like this. Then what happens is this. He noticed something about the owners of the restaurant. They were flacos, los flacos, very, very skinny. They cooked all this good food, but they were very skinny. And he couldn't understand that. And he was going to ask them, but he remembered, wait a minute. I took 3 pieces of advice. The first one was a shortcut. I don't know if that one was any good, but I do know the second one was mind my own business. I'm going to take it. He didn't say anything. One day, El Flaco, the skinny man, came up and said, dishwasher, restaurant's yours. Why are you giving me the restaurant? I'm just the restaurant's yours. I'm just the dishwasher. Why are you giving me the restaurant? Well, let me tell you, we've run the restaurant for years and years and years. My wife and I, we just like a little bit. People always bugging us. Why don't we eat so much food? Why are we skinny? We don't have any children. We don't have any family. Our whole life has been the restaurant. We've decided long ago we'd give the restaurant to the man who could mind his own business. Well, now he owned a restaurant. He could take care of his family, and he decided to go get them, bring him into the village, and from then on, they wouldn't do the hard life of the farm. They'd do the hard life of running a restaurant in the village. So he goes back to there, and he runs into his compadre. His compadre says, oh man, you won't believe the first piece of advice about the shortcut, the bandits, it was good. And he told him the story of the skinny people about minding your own business. Boy, first piece of advice, they were good pieces of advice. Then he goes up to his house and he looks in the window. Boy, his blood was boiling. There was his beloved wife. And on the sofa was a handsome young man. had his arm around her, and they were talking so sweet, and she had a tear, and he'd wipe it away, give her a little kiss on the cheek, and say everything. And he says, this is the thanks I get for going over the mountain, working all those years in the restaurant, sending money back. This is the thanks I get. Pulls out his gun, he's getting ready to go in, and then he remembers, wait a minute, I got 3 pieces of advice. One of them, don't take the shortcut. One of them, mind your own business. The third one was to think before you act. Well, the first 2 were pretty good. Maybe the third one's good too. Put his gun away, collected himself, went up to the house, the door of his own house, knocked on the door. There was the man on the couch. And he realized it was true. His own son had grown up, and he'd not recognized him. The son was comforting the mother, the wife, over her sadness of the long absence of the father, her husband. Well, I don't need to tell you the happy family reunion. Now, I tell you this story for a reason. I already told you a story about a little girl learning some life lessons. Now, this was a lesson for you. Say you're out walking around one day and a little old man comes around with 3 bags of gold. And he makes an offer to you. Think about it. Would you take a bag of gold or 3 buenos consejos? Or would you negotiate a half a bag of gold and 2 pieces of advice? Thank you very much. Okay, I'm just going to keep rolling, and the reason is, remember I wrote that book with 90 stories? I tried to calculate it once, but it made my brain blow up, but I kind of decided, I think I could tell stories for 24 hours without repeating a story. So settle in, order some pizza. We're here for the long run. No, I'm going to keep it going. I'm on the time clock. Okay, we're going to jump to, I love religious stories. So I've told you some chistes, kind of comic tales. I've told you a children's moral tale and adult moral tale. I love religious stories. There's so many religious stories. So I'm going to tell you one of my favorite ones. It's about Pedro de Ordemalas. Now, Pedro de Ordemalas, in the Hispanic culture, is a trickster. And he goes back centuries, so far back that Cervantes, Miguel de Cervantes, not any Cervantes, but the Cervantes of Don Quixote, right? Miguel de Cervantes wrote a play about Pedro de Ordemalas in the Spanish Peninsula culture of the Old World. So that story came over to the New World. So there's a lot of stories about him. He's a trickster. Now, every culture has a trickster. You need a trickster because cultures are tightly bound. And the people that live in cultures, we're constricted by all the rules and regulations and the punishments if we don't stay in the box. But every culture has stories about tricksters because it allows people to have a laugh about people who can step outside of the box and get away with it. The Native Americans have a lot of trickster stories about coyote. The Eastern Europeans, the Russians, Polish people have Till Ugenspiel. We actually have a 25 year long trickster that has lived in our culture, Bart Simpson. Lives outside of the box, gets away with it, okay? So that's a little setup about Pedro de Ordemalas, the Spanish trickster. Once there was Pedro de Ordemalas, and he was a poor man. And he was so poor, most times he just had but 1 or 2 centavos in his pocket. But every night he would go to the cantina. And I've already told you about people in the cantina. Well, they'd play cards and everything. And then when he won, it was good because he was happy. And his heart was large and he was kind. And he would stand up and get all his money, and he'd take it up to the bar and put it on the bar, and he'd say, "Cervezas para todos mis amigos." Beer for all my friends. So no one ever minded when he won, because they knew everyone was going to get beer. So one night, he's coming home from the cantina, and he notices two beggars, and they're looking horrible. They stink, they're ragged, flies are roaming around them, missing teeth, the whole thing. And their plight touches his heart, but all he has left is 1 centavo. And he says, "I can't help you." And he starts to walk away. And then one of them says, "Please, please, this day has been horrible for us. Dogs have done you know what on us. Children have kicked dirt on us. Mean men have thrown stones at. Please help us. You're our last hope." Well, he knows what it's like to be poor and needy, so his last centavo, okay, he gives it to him. He starts to walk away. Then he hears a big poof, and he turns around, and where the two beggars were is the Lord and St. Peter. And he knows it's the Lord and St. Peter because they look like they're pictures in the church. So he kind of straightens himself up. It's the Lord and St. Peter. And he goes up and he says, and then St. Peter calls him over. Now the Lord doesn't do the talking. The Lord just stands there being lordly. St. Peter does all the talking, and he calls him over and he says, Pedro, come over here. The Lord and myself, we have, every now and then we come down to earth to spend a day to see who on earth is living by the Christian principles, especially the one of kindness to the poor and needy. Well, I don't need to tell you about the hard day we've had. I already told you that. You're the only person on earth that live by the Christian principles of being kind to the poor and needy. Because of that, the Lord says, you can have whatever you want. Whatever I want, whatever you want. Gee, I know what I want. I want a deck of cards, does what I tell it to do. And St. Peter says, that's the most common request. I keep them in my pocket. And then the Lord and St. Peter, they get ready to leave. And Pedro says, just a minute. I got something else. St. Peter said, something else? No, you said, the Lord said I could have whatever I want. I want something else. So St. Peter looks at the Lord goes, okay. So he says, well, you know, I've been thinking about it. I know it sounds crazy, but I want a drum. That if someone else is beating it, they can't stop beating it till I let him go. And St. Peter says, hey, there's no drum like that. You can forget that idea. That drum, hey, he poofed the whole world in 7 days. Tell him to poof it. He's got a point, just poof it. There's the drum. So now the Lord and St. Peter, they're in a hurry to get out of there, right? And Pedro says, just a minute, one more thing. And St. Peter says, believe me, you don't want to make him mad. Remember the locusts? Remember the flood? You don't want to make him mad. And the Lord did look at him, and lightning bolts came out of his eyes. Boom! Pedro said, my last one, I promise, last thing. Here's what I like. Whenever any member of my family dies, they go straight to La Gloria, heaven itself. Straight to La Gloria, heaven itself. Let's get out of here. Lord says, okay, poof, they're gone. Well, I ought to tell you, as we know, people die all the time. So members of Pedro's family would die, and they'd be at the funeral, but Pedro would be there happy and looking at the sky and everything, beaming, because he knew their soul went straight to La Gloria, heaven itself. So things worked out for his family, right? So Pedro goes to the cantina always wants to play with his deck of cards, right? He wins every time. But no one cared because every time, cervezas para todos mis amigos. So then what happens is this. One night, Pedro's walking home, got that nighttime walk home from the cantina, comes up to his house. He notices a wooden cart outside the house. Never seen that before. Okay. Goes inside the house, and inside the house is sitting Doña Sebastiana, La Muerte, death herself. And she says, Pedro, I'm on my nightly journey, pulling the carreta de la muerte, the death cart, collecting souls for the long journey to eternity. Tonight is your night. Ooh, gee. I'm not ready. No one ever is. Gee, kind of sudden. It always seems that way. I don't want to go. They never do. Look, I'm ready. I've had a good life. But you know my friends in the cantina? First, I got to go give my good friend my deck of cards, tell him the secret, wink, wink. And, well, you know what I want to do? They're my good friends. I'm ready to go, but you can help me. Let's get all my friends here so I can give away all my stuff. Then when all my stuff is gone, my deck of cards, I'm ready to go. You know I'll get them here faster. You beat the drum. They'll hear the drum. They'll run over, see what's happened. We'll get this moving fast. So Doña Sebastiana agrees to it. Starts beating the drum like that. Pedro gets his deck of cards, says, hasta mañana. Goes to the cantina. He comes back the next day. Doña Sebastiana, La Muerte, death herself. Pedro, I can't stop beating the drum. Please, anything. 10 more years. 10 more years. Now, we all know 10 years goes by pretty fast. Pedro comes by. There's the Carreta de la Muerte. This doesn't look good. Goes in the house. She doesn't say anything. She just touches him. His soul leaves his body. He's gone. But here's the trick. Remember the last promise from the Lord? Any member of his family who dies goes straight to La Gloria, heaven itself. Pedro's a member of his own family. So he's walking up to the pearly gates. There's St. Peter in the book. St. Peter says, Pedro. We've been laughing about it down here. That thing with the drum, that was good. That was real good, Pedro, but you can't come in. How come? It's simple. Let's just open the book of your life. We'll just do one page. Cantina. You can't come in. Oh, yes, I can come in. Remember the promise? Any member of my family gets let in? Well, I'm a member of my own family. I get in. St. Peter says, just a minute, wait right here. So he goes in, and he hears this commotion, and he's talking to the Lord. Now, if you ever get in there to see the Lord, you know who it is. One, he's the guy on the throne with naked babies flying around his head. You know it's him. So St. Peter comes out, says, the Lord, you can come in, but you better be good. So now he's in there. A couple of eternities pass by, and he's kind of bored, right? What do you guys do up here? We're just happy. That's it. We're just happy. Well, calls over some of the angels. Hey, I got a little something to pass the time. Pulls out his deck of cards. Pretty soon, St. Peter hears a commotion, and the Lord doesn't like commotions. Send St. Peter over to see what's going on. There the angels, all in a circle around Pedro. Pedro has a pile of sandals by him, couple of robes, some wings, all the angels like this. And St. Peter says, Pedro, what are you doing? Well, me and the boys, we're just, out here, eternity is a long time. I thought me and the boys would just pass a little time. You're the one gave me the deck of cards. Well, Pedro, this can't happen. Come here with me. You got to go down to Purgatorio. I'm going to send you down to Purgatory. Purgatory is the place where you go, it's like on deck, right? You're on deck. You got to suffer a little bit more for your sins, get cleaned up a little bit more, and then you'll be let back into heaven. And then you got to go down there because you're not ready for heaven yet. So they send him down to Purgatorio. So he goes down to Purgatorio. Pretty soon there's a commotion down there. So St. Peter goes down there. There's Pedro with a whip. He's whipping all the sinners down there. And they're screaming and hollering, Pedro, what are you doing? What are you doing? We're making sure that these sinners suffer a little bit more. By their suffering, their sins are forgiven. They get to go to heaven. Pedro, you don't understand. They got to do their own suffering. Pedro, I hate to say this. You can't stay in Purgatorio. You got to go down to limbo. Limbo's where the unbaptized babies go. They no sins. They're babies, but they're not baptized, so they can't get into heaven. So they got to go down to limbo. So here's what happens. They go down. Pretty soon, there's a commotion down in limbo. And Pedro, St. Peter goes down to see what happens. Pedro's got the babies and he's dunking them in the river. And there's Pedro, what are you doing? I'm baptizing. Pedro, you're not a priest. You cannot baptize babies. Pedro, I hated it to come to this. There's only one place left for you. The land of El Diablo. So Pedro's walking up to the land of El Diablo. Now, I know none of you have been there yet, but let me tell you about it. Red carpet, valet parking, guys carrying your bags in, right? It's nice in front of the door, but once you get inside and that door closes, bang, whoa, a little hot in here, don't you think? Well, let me tell you, Pedro's given a job. Pedro, here's your job. See this pile of rocks? Move them over there. So he moves them over there. And then it was El Diablo himself, see? You know, the Lord has St. Peter do all his work, but El Diablo, he does his own work. He's kind of chuckling to himself, and he says, because Pedro says, well, what do I do now? Well, move him back over there. So he moves him back over there. El Diablo's laughing. He said, you know, Pedro, that thing with the drum was funny. That thing of Gloria, heaven, and purgatory and limbo, that was funny. But we always knew you'd end up with us. Move him back over there. Hey, I've already moved him 10 times. Well, Pedro, that's the beauty of the place. For all eternity, that's your job. Just move those rocks back and forth. Okay. So, El Diablo, he's in his room. Now, I got to tell you about El Diablo's room down there. Air conditioned. He doesn't like to leave his room. So he hears a big commotion in the corner, and he comes out, and over there is a big commotion. All the other little devils biting their tail, pulling their horns, spinning on the ground and everything. And they go, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? Well. And they point in the corner, and there's Pedro like this. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. Now, when he said those holy names, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, in the land of El Diablo, even El Diablo started biting his tail, pulling his horns, spinning on the ground. You cannot say those holy words in the land of El Diablo. El Diablo said, hey, it's never happened, but you cannot stay here. Boom, kicked him out. Pedro, he's dead, so he can't go back to earth. Kicked out of La Gloria, kicked out of Purgatorio, kicked out of limbo, kicked out of the land of El Diablo. There's no home for him. He was the universe's first homeless man. So he goes all the way up, back to the pearly gates. There's St. Peter saying, hey, that was good down there, but I don't know what we can do now. And Pedro says, you have to do something. I remember when you and the Lord were like poor and desperate on earth. I was the only one that helped you. St. Peter, you're my namesake. Pedro means Peter in Spanish. You're my namesake. You have to help me. So he says, stay right here. So he goes out, and then he comes back in, and he says, well, you can't go back in. You're being kicked out of every place else. But the Lord has a plan for you. And this is the plan. You will spend all eternity out here by me. And we will transform you into a rock. But not any rock. A rock con ojos. A rock with eyes. And the reason is, when Dona Sebastiana makes her nightly journey with the Carreta de la Muerte, the death cart, collecting souls for their long journey into eternity. And at her touch, their soul leaves their body. And one day, they arrive here in front of me. And I open the book of their life and look at the pages of their days to see whether they have lived a life to make them worthy of eternal happiness in La Gloria itself. Before I pass final judgment, I will look at you, Pedro, and you, with your ojos, will look deep into their souls, and because of the life you have led, you will be able to tell me if they are worthy for life in La Gloria. I'll tell you this story. One day, Dona Sebastiana, she will come for us. Some of us sooner than others. And on that day, when you walk up to those pearly gates and the book of your life is opened, and that rock con ojos look at you, make sure you have led a life worthy of eternal happiness in La Gloria itself. Thank you. Okay, here we go. When Jana starts sneaking up at me, I know it's over. Hey, I could go on and on and on, but here's what I want you to do. Research your own culture and family stories. Every culture has rich stories. I always like to end with the same saying. Dichos are little sayings. They're like aphorisms, sweet little sayings. Here's the one I like to end with. All these stories are brought down to us on the wings of angels, sent to us from those who have passed before. And I will end this with one last wish for you. Buenos cuentos, buenos amigos. Good stories, good friends. Adios, amigos.